Hi there, and welcome to my latest YouTube video. Today hasn't got any of me out in the woods or anywhere else. What it is a presentation to get some short, sharp snaps of examples for specific subjects with ICM. I look forward to welcoming a group of lovely ladies next week to Norfolk for a course that I'm running over there, Woodlands and Waves. And I always do a little bit of a check in, go over some of the basics all over again before we meet. And so this video is sort of principally made for them, but I thought I'd share it on YouTube because it might be useful to someone else. So I hope you'll enjoy it. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will all work. There we go. Right. So this is called ICM Dip Your Toe subjects. And the reason for the name will become clear now because I actually run a 6-session workshop called ICM Deep Dive. And so I thought this kind of dip your toe versus deep dive was quite a play on words. So you'll have to excuse me if you don't find that amusing at all. I just thought I'd let you know if you do enjoy this presentation I'm going to give you, it's just a short intro into a few subjects. And if you do enjoy it, you might enjoy the ICM Deep Dive course. It's 6 sessions run over 12 weeks, small group of 6. The session's recorded for a rewatch. There's no time limit on rewatches. I never delete my YouTube videos off the ether. Feedback exercises on each session, and then the following session we go over feedback on the exercises you submit. The subjects we cover are woodland, water, architecture, animals, abstract, and a lot more as well. So if you're interested after you've watched this video and think, actually, I'd like to get into that a little bit more, I'm just giving you a little taster of some of the sessions in this presentation. Basically, because when we go to Norfolk, we're going to be covering water on the beach, woodlands. There'll be some architecture in the form of beach huts, and there might be some people photography and some landscape. So I'm covering those off today, just so you can get a little bit. But if you're interested, pop onto my website and go under the education and then the in-person workshops. And sorry, go onto the education and the online workshops, and you'll see the ICM Deep Dive subjects option. You can register and pay direct on the website, so it's very easy. Okay, spiel over, especially for those guys that are seeing me in a week. This is not relevant to you. Right. So the absolute basics, okay? We're going to start with just a little reminder, okay, for you guys that are watching this. All ICM, regardless of subject matter, requires choices to be made, okay? And these are the shutter speed used, the direction of the movement of the camera, the speed and the fluidity of the camera movement, and when you press the shutter. You always need to think about what your image is about. What do you want the ICM to bring to the image? Now, that's actually no different to any other image. When you make another image, whether it be ICM or not, you should always think about what you're actually trying to create. But for ICM, it's always worth thinking, why do I want to use this technique? So, direction of movement. You can use whatever camera movement you want. Okay, it doesn't have to be horizontal and it doesn't have to be vertical, which used to be very traditional, what everybody thought ICM was about. Certain movements suit certain subject matters better than others. In general, if you look at the lines or the direction of movement within the scene or an object, and you can use this as a starting point. So, for example, trees, obviously very vertical. Landscape tends to be horizontal, especially if you're out, got a sea horizon, for example. Things like paths, water, you can go with those as well. Don't be scared to break the rules. So if I suggest you go with the movement of something, such as a waterfall, you'd assume to go down and over the waterfall. Don't be scared to go up and over the waterfall. You never know. You might come up with something very special. So what I would suggest are just sort of guidelines and things to get you started. But the more you experiment and the more you push the boundaries, probably the more you're going to learn about what you like and what you don't like. Movements come from the fingers. So with your fingers, you can just move the camera very slightly from the wrist, from the arm, or from the waist. I'm not going to do that, but you know, I can dance. The bigger the body part used, the bigger the movement, and the more time, the longer shutter speed you're going to need. Okay. So the direction of your movement can create the end result. Okay, so these are just three examples, just to give you an idea from one location that I took in Amsterdam. So on the left-hand side, we're moving the camera left to right. This is just one sweeping movement. These are about quarter of a second. You lose all the verticals, okay, but it's left to right. The one in the middle is up and down, and I tended to go upwards because that's just naturally what I do. Again, most of the horizontals have now been lost. The one on the right, this is especially valuable if you do architecture. I drew a square, so I actually drew round one of the windows on the other side of the canal. And so it's just to give you an idea of what sort of different movements can do. Okay. When you're out in the woods, further movements of the camera, you can do whatever you want. Okay. So when I say swish up to the left, I mean kind of like with the camera. The one in the second one along is an up and back down. So I've actually moved the camera up and back down rather than just going one way. I've gone up and down. An arc to the left. So we had a swish to the left, and an arc to the left is kind of moving a bit more like round a circle. And then hold and jig to the right is actually sort of a hold and almost like creating a little arse shape. So, these are just to show you what you can do in the woods with these, there's nothing special. The composition wasn't anything special, but it's just to show you how you can affect the ICM result in the camera by moving the camera differently. Your choice of shutter speed is a very personal thing, okay? And it will affect how much detail you hold or how much softness you bring to an image. I tend to use various shutter speeds depending on the result that I want to achieve, and also for different subject matters. But in general, the longer the shutter speed, the more time you have to make your movement. The bigger movements you can make and the more complex movements you can make. However, the longer shutter speed you have, the softer the images become, the less detail you hold, the more, unless you keep moving, it can become a little bit blurred. So there's sort of pluses and minuses. In general, I work somewhere between a quarter of a second and 2 seconds now these days. That's sort of my space that I'm working within. The speed and the fluidity of the movement. This is how fast you actually move the camera while you're making the image, and also how smooth or jerky your image is. And this will affect the end result, and also the feel of the result and an emotion. Okay. And this is where it's really useful to think about the subject matter and what you want the ICM to do. If you want ICM to bring tension to an image or put sort of an edge to things, then small jerky movements that are very short and sharp will create this feeling in the image. If you move the camera very gently, you have a very soft, very calm feeling in the image. So the speed also, you can move your camera sort of up like that, or you can move your camera very calmly. So it all has a different effect on the end result. But, again, do have an explore. These are just two examples, both beach scenes, but one is in Harris and one's in Norfolk. The one on the left was a very fast movement left to right. It was a short, sharp, direct movement, a quarter of a second. And what I've done is accentuated the lines and kept the colors and kept the shape of the landscape. Okay. The one on the right was a slower, more considered movement. And I moved the camera to follow the hill lines that were on the edge of the water. And it was a smooth but gentle and rolling. And with 4 seconds, I kind of went almost in a sort of wide helix, a sort of squashed figure of 8 to make that one, just to bring that creation to it. But you can see very, very different feel from these two images. When you press the shutter, okay, something else to think about. Choosing when to press the shutter during the movement can affect the image. So you can press the shutter and move the camera. So you press and then move the camera. Okay, I'm doing it upwards as if I was doing trees, but if you press, go left, go right, whatever it is. But basically you press the shutter first and let the camera start going and then make the movement. Alternatively, you can start the camera rolling, press the shutter and keep moving. The key is to keep moving. If you don't keep moving at the moment you press the shutter, you will have a still image still. So I have to, if I'm doing that one, I quite often have to tell myself to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And also it's making sure that when you press the shutter, you don't cause a great big jig within the movement. You have to do it quite smoothly and be very sort of focused on what you're doing. If you want really smooth compositions, when you see barcode ICMs, which have got no kind of obvious detail in, that's normally being done by somebody moving the camera before they press the shutter and continuing. This is just an example of that. So the top is what I was looking at, which was some ferns, and I just thought they looked like mini trees. This one down here is pressing the shutter and moving the camera. So you can see there's still held a little bit of detail of the ferns, a little bit of detail of the grass. The one on the right, I started moving the camera, then I pressed the shutter and carried on. You can see there's a lot less detail. It's all about the contrasts of the lines, okay? And there's no start point within the image, whereas here there is still a point at which it's sharp where I started the image moving. A few points to remember with all ICM, regardless of subject matter. I do generally work in manual mode. You can work in shutter speed mode. That's what TV, I think, or shutter priority, depending on what camera you're working on. You could you do need the image to be in focus before you start to make the ICM. That's a classic rookie mistake, that people think because it's blurred it doesn't need to be in focus, but you should focus on something within the image. Normally it's the thing that if you were taking a normal sharp image you would want to have in focus. It might be the waves on the beach or the nearest tree to you, or if you're taking people or a flower, you'd be focusing on the same sort of thing as you would normally, but you do need the image in focus to start with. You can use autofocus, or you can use continuous or back button focus. Okay, so it's up to you. Remember to turn off image stabilization in the camera and in the lens. I tend to use matrix mode metering unless you're working with a very high contrast scene, because you're moving the camera around and you want the whole thing to work out. And don't forget to clean your sensor, because quite often you're working at high f-stops within ICM, and that means that every little speck of dust shows up because you move everything else and the dust spots stay absolutely pin sharp on your image. So yeah, do clean your sensor with ICM. One thing to remember is that ICM is more than just a technique. It is a creative process. And to the end, I always suggest that you have a think about what you want to what you want the ICM to bring to the image. So I love using ICM technique to bring emotion, feeling, and movement into my images. Okay, and before I make my images, I ask what sort of movements I'm noticing, or what sort of shapes I am noticing. Maybe there's a certain feeling I'm noticing. Maybe it's calm, maybe I'm anxious, maybe it's awe, or I'm just looking at something and feeling beauty. And then what I need to do is translate the movements that you see, or the feeling of what you would like to bring to the image, into movements with the camera. And I already alluded to, whether you move smoothly or jerkily. But, also if you're stood in a tree, if you're stood by the waves, you might choose to move the camera in the direction of the waves. If you hear the rustle of the leaves, you might choose to shake the camera in response to that movement. And then I translate the lines and the patterns into movements with the camera. Are they straight? Are they bendy? And then, do you want ICM to bring a feeling of mystery, softness? Do you want to accentuate a certain feature, such as a shape or a color or a specific element in the landscape? Again, these are all things to think about when you ask yourself what it is you actually want to capture in the scene. Finding the image. If something makes you stop to make an image, take a moment to ask yourself what it was you noticed. Okay, this is a biggie. Whatever you're photographing, whether you're doing ICM, multiple exposure, or got your camera on a tripod, anything, think about this, because it will make your photos stronger. Ask yourself, was it a color, a composition, a light, or a point of interest, or an emotion you felt? And if you can identify this trigger, you can bring strength to your images and create an image that's representative of why you picked your camera up to start with. I always look for contrast in my image, and I always ask myself whether the image has an interest or focus point, and whether I would have actually made this image if I wasn't doing ICM. A classic thing that a lot of people do when they start ICM, you say, I'm going to make an ICM image. And that's a bit like going and saying in the middle of a field, I'm going to make a photo. What of? You don't just make, in general, you don't just make an ICM image. And ICM is like a technique or a process. It's not what you make the image of. It's part of how you make the image. So remember that. And then think about whether the image is balanced or whether you can make it balanced. And look, as I said before, these are not all ICM image specific, but they are essential when creating ICM images in the woods or the beach or architecture that will be pleasing to the eye. This is just an example of something that took my eye, something very simple, something very plain. I mean, why would you make a photo of it? I just loved it. It was a fence line on the top of some dunes when I was in Norfolk last year, and I just loved the sky color. And I love the sky versus the sand. And then I love these straight lines, the sort of wooden posts, and then all the little sticks on the wire in between. And so I actually do love the one on the left because of it, you know, it's just such a beautiful composition. But what I did was I moved the camera upwards, and then I cropped in a little bit too. And I think it's probably this little bit here that I just played with. And I quite like the interpretation. It's very abstract, it's very simple, but it's kind of a way of interpreting what I was looking at. So you'd still need to get the exposure right when you're doing ICM. So start with your ISO as low as possible, set your f-stop as high as possible, and for anybody just getting started and not sure where to start, or if you're in a new location and you're thinking, where on earth do I start with my shutter speed? I normally go somewhere between 1/4 of a second and 1 second. Okay, this will be personal choice for you, but you know, set it somewhere in that parameter and then make a photo. It doesn't need to be a special photo or a good photo. It just needs to be a photo that captures the exposure. And then you can have a look and see whether the exposure is going to work for you at those settings you've got. If the image is too dark, you can reduce your f-stop to let a little bit more light. You can increase your ISO to let a little bit more light in, and you can also lengthen the shutter speed. Okay, so there are all ways of getting more light in. However, if it's too light, you have less of a choice. Okay, if it's very bright or you're getting blown highlights already, you need to shorten the shutter speed. Now, this is a problem with ICM because if you shorten the shutter speed too much, you won't have time to make a movement. So the other option is to use filters. And generally, once I'm moving over 1 second, I do put a filter on my camera in any setting, unless it's very dark. And sometimes out on the beach, even when I'm working at 1/4 of a second, I need a filter to be able to make my ICM images. So let me just grab a cup of tea. So a few basics related to some specific subjects. I'm just going to run over woodlands, water, landscape and architecture because as I said, next week we're off to Norfolk and we're out on the beach and we're in the woodlands. And obviously on the beach you do find people and you do find you find the landscape, you find the water, and out in the woods we obviously find trees. So we're going to cover these off. So woodlands. Um, you choose the movement direction. Okay, so I gave you that little sort of hint earlier on. But for tree trunks, we start with the vertical movement. Okay, but you can add whatever you want. And it's also worth saying you can go upwards or you can go downwards. Okay, it's a completely personal choice. If you want to add elements to this up-down movement, it might be a flick at the end to represent leaves. It might be a slightly horizontal movement if you feel the branches are stronger than the tree trunk. It might be a shake to represent the movement in the leaves, or it might be a multiple up-down movement, or it might be a very small movement from the hand or a large movement from the arms and the bodies. It really is your choice as to what you want to interpret from the scene in front of you. This is an example. This I actually made quite a long time ago now. And when I got here to this location, the sun was out and I saw this image. By the time I got my camera out, the sun had gone in. So I knew I wanted to wait. So I waited half an hour and the sun came back exactly how I wanted to get it. And so what you can see is the movement of the camera. It's a, you know, it was probably a movement like that. But I don't tend to make very large movements with my woodland ICM because I like to keep the detail in the tree trunks. Anyway, I moved the camera upwards because I saw these lovely the sort of orange branches here. And in doing so, I have sort of created a firing tree, a tree on fire, and then sort of almost looks like the embers have dropped on the floor and it's lit fire to the woods. I quite like that one. Something very simple here. My eye just fell. Again, what do I notice? My eye fell on the way that the light fell on this little branch here. So a few different movements. This is just a gentle shake with the camera. This one here was a bigger shake. In fact, it might have been slight circles because you can just about see the circle that I've moved. This one was a zoom burst, so I just twisted the lens and created a sort of lens movement rather than a whole camera movement. In Woodlands, contrast is really important. Now, this doesn't matter, again, whether you're doing ICM or non-ICM, this is really important in Woodlands. But contrast can add a lot to ICM images, and even subtle contrasts help to elevate images. So when in the Woodlands, what you need to do is find the contrasts in the scene, which quite often it will be what you initially were drawn to versus the surroundings. So possible contrast, color and monotone, contrasting colors, light, dark, maybe a shape. Was it straight or bendy? Is it old or new, soft or hard? Is it something to do with the foreground and the background? Are there different lines and patterns? These are not ICM images. This is what I saw, and I wanted to look and sort of just give you an example of. So, okay, in here you've got things, but like here, we've got a bit of color and a bit of monotone, and we've also got very straight lines. We've got light versus dark in here. We've got lines versus softness. This one here, we've got lines versus softness. We've got color versus gray. We've got lovely light on here. Which other ones shall I have a look at? This one here, it was a difference between the black. Again, you got quite a lot of monotone versus color here. And then this tree was really sort of gnarly and sort of skeletal. And then this one was full of leaves. So a very soft versus a very sharp image. So again, you're looking for any kind of contrasts that you can that you're drawn to bring into the ICM, and it generally makes your ICM a lot better. For balance, composition, and finding the image, okay, remember that your image can sometimes be literally a step away from where you're stood, okay, so don't forget to sort of move your feet, and also don't forget to turn around. Quite often I'm seen walking down a path and looking back behind me every 10 steps to see whether there's a better image behind me. But this is just a classic example. I really quite liked this first scene to start with. I made this nice ICM. I quite liked it, but then I realized that I was kind of falling out the bottom left corner of the path. So I just moved back 2 steps, and then I managed to get this little bush in front of me, and then the path goes up through the middle, and it holds you into the image, and it takes you through the image much better than this one here. So it's worth thinking about the composition. Quite often, one location can offer multiple possibilities. People laugh, but when I'm out in the woods, I talk about finding your lead singers, your duos, your boy bands, the choirs, and the orchestras. Okay, because once you've found them, you can find your composition, and the areas ringed are possible different compositions. So there's this one here, which kind of zooms in on this little group of 5 here. There's a bigger one here, which is the 5 and these 3 over here. There's a much bigger one that takes in nearly the whole scene, which is kind of a balanced set of images. And then there's another little one over here. And I'm sure there's probably many, many more in there. But when I'm looking for the contrast. And this has got some lovely contrast because it's like some really strong, dark tree trunks. And in the background, this is when I'm talking about my orchestra or my choir. This is your backing singers and the people that are less important, but stop you from having too much light coming into your image. Speaking of light, your biggest distractions with woodland ICM is sky, okay? One of the ways to combat this is to actually zoom in and lose the sky. The other is to be very careful with how far you move or to reduce the exposure so that it doesn't affect it. But you can see the one on the right here. I've just caught the sky and you end up with sort of sharp white lines or dots within the image, which can be a little bit distracting. So water, and I'm going to do specifically the beach. When we do the course, we also look at rivers and puddles and fountains and other man-made running water. But for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to whiz through beach, okay? Special to water, it is a constantly moving entity, okay? And this makes it quite a challenge with ICM because you are never, ever, ever going to make the same image twice, okay? In ICM, you're combining your ICM movement of the camera and the movement of the water. And you have to give consideration to both, okay? When you play with fluffy waterfalls, you put your camera on a tripod and you let your slow shutter speed run. You capture the movement of the water and you are keeping your camera deliberately absolutely still. With ICM, you're actually moving the camera. So what was already a soft image becomes really, really soft if you're not careful with regarding the shutter speeds. So it's quite an interesting one to play with. Light, location, wind, clouds and sun, wave size and energy, and where you stand on the beach. Even the slightest difference can have an effect on the end ICM results. When you're photographing waves, take the time to study the movement of the waves. Okay, think about what it is that you're noticing that's interesting, and it might surprise you what you're actually drawn to. It might be what's happening right at your feet, not what's happening when the waves are breaking further out. Okay, especially if the waves aren't massive, which has happened most years when we've gone to Norfolk. The waves have ended up being about this big, and we've ended up playing with the ripples on the floor around our toes rather than any massive breakers. So you can also think about the angle you stand to the waves, which movement you want to capture. What do you find most beautiful? Is it the curl of the wave? Is it the crash? Is it the lull? Is it the way it comes towards you or away from you? And then you want sky or horizon in your images. You don't have to, you could just go for the waves. Do you want single or multiple waves? Do you want to incorporate other elements such as boats or wooden structures? So many choices, and you thought you were just going to photograph the beach. Light can play a big part in the results you attain, and your movement can affect the movement that the waves have. So you can actually put more energy into waves. So even if you've got the tiniest little wave, you can actually make it look as though it's quite big by putting the energy into it. This is just to show you a little example of some shutter speeds and how that can affect your waves. Okay, so the ones on the left are made by 1/4 of a second, and you can see there's still quite a lot of detail, texture, but there's some nice ICM movement. In the middle, I've gone for 1 second, and you can see that the water other than the waves has actually got a lot softer and a lot smoother because my movement and its movement in 1 second has started to smooth the whole thing out. By the time you get to 2 seconds, the feeling of overall softness really comes into it. And if this is what you're looking for, it's great to go for a slightly longer shutter speed and enjoy working with it. As I said before, your movement can affect the movement of the waves in your images. So this was a very small ICM movement. These ones were bigger. And in fact, these ones actually moved the camera upwards rather than going with the waves. I actually flicked it up, which is why the water's going upwards in the images rather than going where it actually was. Some more examples of where you stand, which angle standing to the waves. Do you want the waves to come straight at you, or do you want to have like a bit of the beach in there? Do you want to have a diagonal line going through your images? Do you want to include a horizon in your images? Okay, so again, it depends on whether you want to portray the location or whether it's just the waves that are capturing your eye. Single or multiple waves? Just so many choices. On the top here, you've got multiple waves. On the bottom, single waves. Again, it's a personal choice as to what you think you're noticing. And other elements. I love shooting wooden sort of posts and things like that. It's actually quite hard because the water is going in a completely different way to the posts. So it actually takes a little bit of working out how big a movement you want to make and what you want to accentuate. This one here, I was actually really concentrating on keeping the posts quite solid. This one here, it was all about the way that the water was interacting with the posts. So again, it depends on what you want the other images to be. Okay, landscape. All right. Again, try to figure out what it is that you noticed in the landscape. Was it a contrast? Was it the lines? Was it an object? Was it the light? It might be a tree or a building, or it might be just the view or the sunset. Who knows? And then work with the strongest lines, not against them. Okay. Pick the strongest elements you want to make important in your images, and then decide how much detail you want in your images. Do you want to smooth the lines or do you want to hold some detail? Again, this is going to affect your shutter speed and the movements you make. Do you want the whole image or just in front of you or just a bit of it? Same again, like the beach. Do you want the horizon? Do you want to zoom in? It's up to you. And then your shutter speed, as is your movement, is your choice entirely. This is actually on the beach as well, but it's got a little bit more land or beach than the sea. And it's just to show you the effect that shutter speed could have on your landscape image. So here, 1/4 of a second, quite a fast movement. And literally, it's sort of smoothed the lines and given you a bit of barcode. Excuse the wonky horizon. Okay. It's to show you the shutter speed, not really good ICM images. The one in the middle is 1 second, and it is just a movement. And basically, I've done the same setting. It's just I've moved the camera slowly during that 1 second. And the last one, what I've done is taken the camera forwards and backwards within 2 seconds. And that's why you've got this really soft effect. So again, it just depends on what you like as when you're playing with your ICM images. This one here was actually quite tricky. I made this up in the Peak District in the snow, and it's quite tricky because these were horizontal lines of the fence lines and the walls within a landscape. You've got trees which are vertical, and then you've got a building which actually has horizontals and verticals. And you can see what I chose to do was actually move the camera upwards very slightly, but only a small amount. I quite like it. I don't mind that it sort of moved the roof up a little bit. I think it creates more of a box shape, which I quite like, and it's worked really nicely for the trees. And just the way it's sort of the landscapes merged, I think it works okay. But that was an upwards movement within the landscape. This is for the same location but very different movements. So this one here, I actually kind of shook the camera very slightly and maybe moved it up a little bit because you can see there's a slight movement here. Very soft, almost looks as though you're looking through sort of glass which has got smeared. This one here, what I actually did was I actually followed the line of the bridge. So I kind of bounced with my camera over the bridge. And so what you actually done is by doing that, I've followed the lines of something quite strong within the image and kept that shape. And obviously different post-processing, but again, still you can see a very different result. Here again, same location, the one on the top left here, just as plain left to right. The one to the right was a slower movement. And then the one on the bottom was actually shake, but I pulled out a little bit. I zoomed out a little bit to get more of the location. I probably like this one best just because it's the smoothest. Not too keen on this one, but that might just be the composition. These are some I made up on the locks on Loch Katrine in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, just to show you something a little bit different. Again, lots of water involved, but these ones I was following the landscape. I was following the mountains in the background, and I was working somewhere between 2 and 4 seconds, and I was very gently following backwards and forward. The aim to be capturing the light, but keeping it very, very soft. Briefly, architecture. Okay. Now, architecture is all about contrasts, lines, shape, texture, light, and colors. And again, asking yourself what you want the ICM to bring. Do you want it to be a realistic representation, or do you want to push the boundaries and go a bit abstract? Is there a certain feeling you want to evoke? You know, it might be that it's a haunted house or that it's a very strong, new sort of graphic building. Have you seen the details, or is it the big picture? Are you going to go and zoom in, or are you going to do wider shots? Are you going to get the whole building or just a little bit? If you think abstract, even the most boring and not obvious can actually become incredible when you're doing ICM. Movement in general, you want to follow multiple lines, not just one, because in most buildings, you've got lines that are horizontal and vertical. And as I showed you right at the beginning, if you drag one, you lose the other one. So the way to do it is to actually move around the lines and sort of put them back. Generally, I work with longer shutter speeds for architecture, which quite often means I need a filter as well. And just remember, architecture is not just cityscapes. And why I've got it in here is because we're going to be doing beach huts, and they are architecture. So any building, any space that's utilised in some way. Your garden shed, local town centre, bus station, beach huts, the shopping mall, village high street, city skyscrapers, a historical building, or modern architecture. And the list goes on. You can pick anything. So when you look at architecture for ICM, you need to see the lines and their direction and see which ones are the most dominant that you're seeing, which capture your eye. And then ask yourself if you want a realistic representation of what you're seeing, or are you exploring it something in a bit more abstract manner? And I quite like doing my architecture a bit more abstract, to be honest. And this is going to dictate the shutter speed. Okay. If I want to hold more detail, so I move and reset the lines, I need a longer shutter speed. If I'm going abstract, I can just go one direction and I don't need such a long shutter speed. Generally, I do tend to work at a minimum of 1 second for the architecture because normally I am moving in more than one direction. If you're working at a quarter of a second, it is impossible to change direction in a quarter of a second with your camera. You can only go in a straight line in one direction or shape. And this just takes us back. So just to remind you what happens to architecture if you don't keep hold of all the directive lines within an image. This is also showing the effect of direction, the same movement. So the top one, left one is a left to right movement, lost all the verticals. The one underneath, I've got a vertical movement, lost all the horizontals. This one here, I took my camera around one of the windows here. And so I drew a square. And so I've managed to keep the squares, which is quite cool. This was a building on my son's university campus at Nottingham. And for me, I looked at it and what did I notice? To me, the vertical lines in the middle of the window were the strongest thing. Okay, it wasn't the box, it wasn't the shape of the building, it was that sort of the blue, the way the light was reflecting. This picture doesn't do it justice, but the light, I could see that the blue and yellow, which I know contrast to start with. So I was kind of got that in my head. I had a little bit of a play. And then I decided to go really, really abstract. And so I really zoomed in literally on this sort of area here and just got the really smooth lines when I was playing with that. What you need to do is also, if you're doing sort of urban landscapes or photographing a place rather than just a building, which is also still architecture, it's just the way it's interacted with and used. You need to think about whether it's the way that people are moving through the area, what it's used for, or is it more about the area and the buildings and the people just happen to be moving through. So again, the effect that you choose to move. So this one here is more about the people movement than the buildings. This one here is more about the buildings and the fact that the people are moving through it just by the way I've moved the camera in the ICM movement. This one, this is just to show you what I was seeing. It's nothing special, but what I thought was that this is just a lamp hanging on a wire, and this is the church tower in the background in my local town, Duisburg. And I just loved the way that this was hanging. It was kind of almost a sort of reflection of the two. So I did a bit of an ICM movement and I just bounced it around and was playing. And then I post-processed it. And I do quite a lot of post-processing. I'm not going to cover that in this session, but we do go into great depth during the course of how to process each subject. But this is what I created from that. Choosing how much we leave in or out of the image. Okay, this was the same set of buildings, but same set of beach huts, but I really liked the two because I felt I preferred the space. I actually now looking at it, I quite like the three. Again, it's just a choice of where you find the balance within the image or what you want to say. Thinking about the angle you stand to the building will have a massive effect on what your ICM does to it. Okay, so these ones I stood quite close and shot down, and here I stood across a little bit to try and go around them. These ones here, these ones I was going round the shape of the V at the top. This one here I was actually drawing a complete sort of pentagon going round all sides of the building. What's distracting about the fact here is that there's a concrete pad and the concrete pad moved up with my movements, which was again things that you need to look out for. The bigger movement you make, the more you move your lines from the original. Okay, so this is a tiny movement, like literally, we're talking that with the camera, very small. Whereas the one on the right, I maybe did it again. I was drawing the pentagon up one side, cross, down, round. Bigger movements, which means I've displaced the lines further from the original. A little bit about people, because again, there will be people on the beach. Ask yourself again, what do you want to portray with the image you're creating? Do you want to show a place with people in the environment to add to the location, or do you want to show a connection between the people and the location? Okay. Is it about the color, what people are wearing? Is it about their movement, the direction of travel, what they're actually doing? Maybe there's kids playing with a ball or somebody playing with a dog. What is that it that actually caught, once again, what caught your eye and what's going on? And then experiment with how close you shoot in individuals and with different lenses, and think about how many people you want in the image. Do you want them all moving at the same speed? Does it matter if somebody stops? and then think about your standpoint. I love shooting people from above, actually, well, from like bridges and things, because I love how they move. They don't move past me, they kind of move away from me. And I also love to tell a story and show a reason for the movement. These ones I made in a shopping mall, and I was on like on a bridge with these people all coming in again. One thing that's great, ICM, you can't ever see who you're photographing. And two, if you're a little bit higher up, nobody even notices you photographing. So for those people that are little bit insecure about photographing people, it's actually a great way to start sort of street photography. So again, you can see four very, very different images. There's a lot going on here with people. I felt it was just too busy. This one, the color, my eye goes straight to the red elements again, which I wasn't desperate about. So I actually flipped it into black and white. And like, these two are slightly different just by the way that the camera was angled. But I really love the way that I've got the kind of movement of the people leaving the building on those. Again, ask yourself what your motivation for making the ICM image is. It's not just making an ICM image. When you just make an ICM image, this is what happens. Okay, you capture people. I'm going to make ICM of people. That's what you get. Okay, there's no narrative, there's no story. This one here I quite like because you've got the reflections on the floor and you've got the direction. You kind of know that they're walking across the mall and then they're going to go up the escalators. This one I quite like because it was a cleaner. It's about the color. But I just like that. So really have a think about what it is you're trying to say with the images. And again, your viewpoint, okay? This one I got right down on the floor, a shot across the floor. This one I shot from the top of some steps as the guy was walking along below me, which I quite like. One way, if you're really struggling, what happens generally when you do ICM of people, you make them fatter or wider, or you make them taller and skinnier, or you end up with two of them on top of each other, which none of it really works very well. Whereas if you actually walk along behind somebody, they're going at the same speed, and you can just move with the camera. You don't even have to make it obvious you're making photos, but because you're moving at the same speed as them, and you're not actually moving the camera to sort of displace their bodies in any way, what you end up with is slightly blurred, but the form of the body still stays the same. So that's a little trick to play with if you're interested. So that was a bit of a whiz through a number of subject matter. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you are interested, and you'd like to take this further, I've literally sketched the surface. Okay, each of the sessions tends to be around 2 hours. And as I said, in a small group of 6, what we do is we present, and then we have the first week we present on Woodlands, an introduction on Woodlands. Second week, we start with feedback on some exercises, and then we go on to the next subject, and that's how the other 5 weeks run. And yeah, as I said, small group, very supportive. And it would be lovely if you're interested to have you join me if you've watched this. I think my next course is starting on the 24th of July, it says there. And so I think, is that right? I don't know. You would need to check on my website, but I have just lifted that off the website. So 24th of July. And like I say, we've got a small group. We've actually got 3 signups already. So there's just 3 places left for that one if you're interested. Thank you very much for joining me on this presentation. I hope you enjoy it. Guys who are joining me in Norfolk next week, thank you very much. I hope this has given you a little refresher, and it helps when we get out on site for you to get going straight away. Many thanks for watching. Till next time. Thank you. Bye.